All right, so next one I'm going to go through today is a good rotational series using some bands. Starting with the anti-rotation and then going into some different levels of rotational drills. One of the biggest issues we see with a lot of athletes is too much movement with the lower body and their inability to kind of lock down the lower body and create rotation from the upper body. So what tends to happen is people are unable to keep their pelvis stable. And if my pelvis can't stay neutral, I end up in this extended pattern. And then when I rotate, my rotation comes through my lumbar spine. If I can get my pelvis out of this extended position and get it neutral, it allows me to lock down and stay as powerful as I can with my lower body. That's going to take my lumbar spine out of the picture and allow me to start to rotate through my thoracic spine where we want to get our movement. So not to say that you don't get a slight amount of rotation from your lumbar spine, but too much a lot of times is the issue we see with a lot of our PGA golfers, a lot of our baseball guys, especially pitchers. We've got a lot of guys that they're creating 90, 100 mile an hour fastballs. And they're coming off the mound. And if my pelvis isn't where it needs to be in space, everything in this position puts me in kind of this extended position, lumbar spine. And then what that does is put the ribs in an extended position, which doesn't allow the shoulder to move the way it should. So understanding why it's important to get the pelvis in a good position and then stack the ribs on top of that pelvis and create this internal canister is where I'm going to create optimal rotational power as an athlete. All right, so this next drill, I'm going to start with an anti-rotation exercise. So think about a car without brakes. If I get my car up to 100 miles an hour and I can't slow it down, what ends up happening? Accident. Same thing happens with the body. So if I can't resist my body moving and creating enough tension to protect myself, I'm going to have problems when I start to try to create rotational power. So this first drill is an anti-rotation drill, basically teaching the body how to start to create enough internal tension to resist rotation. So this is kind of like teaching your body how to create the brakes so that when we do create rotation, we can protect the body. So first drill, we're going to start on the knees. So biggest thing is connectivity with the floor. You think about roots of a tree and the ability to kind of connect with the ground. All my stability is going to come from the floor. If I can't connect with the ground, I don't have a good platform in which to create tension and stability. So the more I can connect with the floor, the better I root into the ground, the better platform I have access to as far as power goes. So starting in this position, some people might have a hard time even getting their toes under. So once again, you start to see, why does the big toe matter, and feet. So starting to get barefoot, get familiar with your feet, feeling the floor, ankle mobility, foot mobility is huge. So I want to get my toes to tuck under on here. Create a good, nice, stable base. Then I want to think about my pelvis on here. So goal on here is I want to get my pelvis to a good neutral position, get my butt cheeks firing. For a lot of our hypermobile athletes, they have a hard time creating tension, so they're here, but they don't really feel much. So one good tool you can do is grab a foam roller, grab a ball, and start to teach people how to kind of create that lower body tension on here. So having the ball to squeeze a lot of times recruits adductors, and that starts to help people move their pelvis better in space. So getting my pelvis in a good neutral position. Then I want to make sure, as far as a band goes, I don't have too much resistance, but I'm challenging myself. So when I'm coming out on this drill, it's not pulling me off to the side, but I'm challenged to come straight off the sternum on here. So I want to think posturally. My toes are underneath me. I get my pelvis in a good place. Feel my butt cheeks, kind of where the hamstrings meet the butt. And then I want to come up nice and tall. So I want to think posture. My ribs want to be over my pelvis. I want to imagine I've got towels under my armpits. So I'm squeezing the towels. The other thing is my head. A lot of times we see athletes like this. So thinking about top of your head all the way down to your sacrum, all the vertebrae lined up. So you're stacking, you've got a great spine angle. So I'm going to tuck, squeeze the towel. The band comes just below the chest, so kind of right at like the base of the sternum. And then keeping those towels squeezed, I want to come out, keeping the towels squeezed under my armpits, coming out front of that chest. So a lot of times what we see is this, shoulders float up, and it's that inability to keep that tension and force the ribs to anchor down to the pelvis. But nice tall position, good base, find your glutes nice and tall. Coming in and out of that position. A lot of athletes need to make sure that they're not starting to go back into this extended posture when they're doing this, but really be aware of continuing to maintain that lower body tension, keep that pelvis underneath the ribs, and then create tension from that point. All right, so now that we kind of started with the basics, we're going to start to go to something a little bit more difficult. So you think pitching, throwing the ball, anything where I'm in more of a staggered stance, things start to get more challenging. This is where it becomes important to really be aware of where the pelvis is in space. So here's a good drill, kind of start to teach the body being in more of a stance position and still owning all the prerequisites to create rotation. So if you think about this on this drill, I'll flip sides here in a sec, is I want to create a two-legged table. Most people live in extension and they've never kind of become aware of getting their pelvis underneath them. So they tend to rotate in this position where their pelvis isn't underneath the ribs. So what's important on here is that I start to create a good 50-50 spread between the two legs. So when I think about tension, I want to have just as good as far as connection with this side as this side. So a lot of times as I explain this, is think of like a push-pull. So on this back leg, tongue of my shoe is into the floor. If I imagined I had a 2x4 running through my legs, I want this knee and this knee trying to hug that 2x4. So what that's doing is creating like an internal vacuum. So I have this internal vacuum this way, and then if I tuck my hip, and then this front foot is trying to drag the floor behind me, I create this vacuum this way. So you think about like a house, internal 2x4s. What we're teaching athletes to do is create internal tension to provide structure so you can have optimal performance. So rather than kind of getting in this rotation, once again, my adductors are both on, so I'm hugging that midline, and then I want to pull my pelvis to neutral. So a lot of times what we see is knees out here too far, all my weight's on this leg, or all the weight's in the back leg, and it's not a good 50-50 spread. So coming up, having a nice strong position. So if someone tried to pull this leg that way, I'm pulling behind, good vacuum position. So showing you guys that, now that I'm able to kind of create that tension, I want to come up nice and tall. Same thing as last drill. So I'm hugging that midline, good posture, squeezing the towels. I'm coming out, and then keeping my lower body from moving, I'm coming across the body. So it's an out, good rotation. And what we tend to see a lot of times is that imaginary 2x4, as I drive out, people's knees come out with it. So if this knee doesn't stay into this wall, I don't create that sponge kind of rotation effect. So the more I keep this knee kind of pushing into this imaginary wall, the more separation I get with my upper and lower body, which is where I'm going to get all my rotation from. That prevents it coming from the lumbar spine and in the thoracic spine. All right, so playing off the last drill we did, we're going to do a more dynamic drill. So think about what I did last drill, kind of getting a little bit more dynamic. So rather than kind of knee coming to the floor, I'm going to start to float that leg, have to find that stability without using the floor. So if I think about squeezing that towel, my pelvis is underneath me, I'm nice and stable. I'm going to step back into a lunge position. Like I said before, my front leg's kind of dragging back, back leg kind of hugging that midline. I'm coming out, rotate, coming back up. Stepping back, find that stability. Pelvis is underneath me, driving out, rotation. Goal on this is just really being familiar with this back foot, your feet, and kind of finding that imaginary 2x4. A lot of times this knee starts trailing out because we don't keep this adductor turned on, and that's where I lose my ability to create good stability with my pelvis in space. But the better I get at feeling that back foot, really create tension into that floor. The better I'm going to start to connect on some of these drills. So think about kind of all these different components, but the feet are huge as far as playing a key role in the stability, and then starting to understand, why do my adductors matter? Why do, I have to think about 17 things. But I think a lot of times athletes want to start at the cool looking stuff, and they don't do enough of work with the fundamentals to start to progress themselves there. So then anything they're doing at a higher level, the risk for injury is there. And if you're not doing it right, those same bad mechanics are going to transfer to your sport, and it's no wonder that injuries happen all the time.